Championship. Let's get one in charge of League One, have people directly responsible for the success of those competitions, and the RFL govern the body, govern the sport overall, decide on the structures, what's best for it, and kind of pull everybody together. But I have no issue with one person being appointed to be in charge of Super League. I think the sport would benefit if we did that in Championship and League One as well.
I think that's a really sensible suggestion, Gareth. I've not heard that one before, so obviously it's not a real Rugby League suggestion because it's a sensible one. No, I'm glad you brought it full circle back round to Robert Elstone, because before we move on to maybe a few listener views that we've had in, I just wanted to ask you what else was outlined, what other sort of things were said at the press conferences yesterday about the plans, because that's one thing I felt a little bit down about, that everything was all about this thing that kicked off and there wasn't really about the things that I think are really more important. How are we going to generate more revenue? How are we going to get season ticket sales to pick up, or even individual match game sales to pick up? How are we going to make sure that clubs are able to run to the salary cap? How are we going to make sure that clubs are able to contribute to the talent pool? Things like that. Was anything like that padded out in any way, shape or form by Robert Elstone or his panel?
No, it was. A lot of this stuff was covered, but it got lost in the headline news in there, I think. And I mean, particularly the organisation I work for, the Mirror, you're always only going to have a certain number of words in a tabloid newspaper to work with. And when it gets taken up by, first of all, the Super 8s thing, but then, your counter statements from Hetherington and that, it does get lost. But it shouldn't, people shouldn't think, therefore, that Elstone, people shouldn't think that Robert Elstone didn't talk about this stuff, because he did. I mean, I've got some quotes in front of me here, and this is a direct quote from him when he sat down afterwards with the written press, and he said, "We look at the format, as in the structure, as the panacea for the game, but we have to realise the solution is within the clubs and the way in which we grow the game." And he talked a lot about clubs being responsible for their own growth and things like that. But I think he wants to have he's already sat down with a lot of clubs and spoken to them about how they can promote their players and how we might be able to get more sponsorship into the game. And he talked a lot as well about, he mentioned he was kind of a protege of Maurice Lindsay, and spoke about his time working then, and whatever people's opinions of Maurice Lindsay, that there was a genuine buzz around the sport and the high profile players
stars,
at that time.
We in the mid-90s?
Yeah,
we had stars,
absolutely.
We had positive news stories, we had some negative kind of, or things very similar to the conversations we're having now as well, and clubs being forced into positions they don't want to be in.
No, like again, I can give you a direct quote. This was from Robert sitting down with us, and he said Maurice had great vision and great energy, and he believed in rugby league. Now, I picked that up definitely from Robert Elstone as well. He told me I was in the business of selling dreams, and he told me to invest in the players. So he was talking about this kind of thing as well, Robert Elstone. And I think this kind of thing will filter out over the next few days, because it went on an hour and a half, we had literally thousands of words worth of stuff to work with. And I think hopefully in the trade press on Monday, we'll get a stronger flavour of the other stuff that talks about. I don't want people thinking that Robert Elstone sat down and kind of listened to the Super League clubs say we're scrapping the Super 8s and that was the press conference, because it wasn't. He was impressive, and I've listened to a lot of people in those kind of roles, and I've been doing this for around 20 years now, and he's the most impressed I've been by anyone that I can remember. But hopefully that comes across in coming days when we've stopped going around in public between clubs.
The latest 40-20 just went to press just before all of this, didn't it? So that's not going to cover it in depth. Will the next Rugby League World be able to cover it in a lot more depth, or do you think it's going to be League Weekly and League Express on Monday, where we'll get all this extra stuff?
Well, certainly I would hope the Monday papers. I should say that although I do work for League Express doing the Championship stuff, and I do work for Rugby League World, I don't have an editorial input there. But I would fully expect both League Express and League Weekly to go in depth with this on Monday, and we have got such a lot of material to use that I think that will be in the papers. Hopefully it would be in your Rugby League Worlds and your 40-20s as well, because it isn't. I know it has been so dominated in the public eye, because I think of Leeds' immediate statements, the statements after that, it got out of hand straight away almost. But that there is more to this appointment, and I hope at some point the narrative gets back round to what Robert Elstone can do for the sport, because I think it could be good for the game and good for the whole game as well, even if he's just focusing on Super League.
No, I'm really hopeful with the things you're saying about him going into the clubs and speaking to the clubs about what they can do, because one thing I felt we let ourselves down with, so certainly during the second 3-year slot of the licensing period, is clubs were completely left to fend for themselves with very little guidance and support, and no real talking to each other about what was working, what wasn't working. And I think you look at for me, the model sports league is often the NFL. And if you look at all the great moments that the NFL have managed to generate, and most of those things are through people working together and owners coming together to make conscious decisions about what's best for the league, knowing that will be best for the sport in the long run, or best for their franchises in the long run. And that's where you see the highest average franchise value and the lowest levels of debt for franchises is in that sports league of all the sports leagues. So they've got something right there, and if we can get some sort of a agreement like what they've managed to in past instances, then I'd be really happy with that. Okay, let's just roll through a few of the views that the listeners have been getting in touch with us, because we've got a wide range for a wide range of clubs and backgrounds, and you'll get this when I start reading out some of these, and feel free to chip in with your reaction to any of these as I go along, Gareth. We've had David Pye get in touch, who's a St Helens fan, but he calls himself a Rugby League fan first, but I know the truth, David. He says, great decision, Super 8s has been interesting, but too much of a gimmick. Nice while it lasted, but back to supporting the top clubs in the top league. But we've got a Leeds Rhinos fan, John Padgett, who said, this is a retrograde step backwards by a group of Super League clubs looking after their own interests to the detriment of the other clubs. So there's the full spectrum covered. David Cantrell, who supports the London Broncos and the London Scholars, said, as long as there's still promotion and relegation, I don't care much about the details. Do we know yet what will happen instead? I assume it's not just going to be 7 fewer games per season. While the players might love that, the finances won't. Yeah, that's one of the questions, isn't it, about extra matches?
Yeah, well, that was kind of cool. Yeah, they did say that there will be some kind of manufactured extra, maybe 6 fixtures. With a formula as yet undecided, which is not ideal, I don't think, in anybody's book. But you're looking at
we ran with from 2002 to 2008. So.
Yeah, it has happened before, and we are stuck in this place at the moment where we haven't quite got it. Well, there isn't enough clubs in the top flight just to play home and away on the current kind of commercial income.
Don't have a set home and away schedule either.
No, not by a long distance. Theirs is all over the place in some ways, isn't it? And there's so many clubs now taking home games to different venues that it really is a wide range of who you play, how many times, and where you play them.
Did that come up? Kind of on the road stuff and double headers maybe and that sort of thing? Because obviously, Ian Lenigan being sat there, he's taking games to London, to Sydney and Wollongong, and there's the Salford we're looking to take a game to New York and all those sorts of things. Did that come up at all in the press conferences?
Toronto was discussed, so they were asked about what they thought about the potential of Toronto being in there, and Robert Elstone he seemed very open-minded about, he wants to know what they can offer. I think he would like to speak to them, and there was nothing specifically about taking games on the road, different clubs, but they did talk about creating events that people want to see and fill stadiums, so perhaps that falls under that kind of bracket.
Philip Tomlinson, he kind of gave a well-measured view. He said, with only 1 up and 1 down, I feel like we have taken a step backwards. It's not got the same appeal as potentially 4 teams moving. That being said, I was reading a lot in terms of sustainability of some of the clubs and seeing the impact of the uncertainty of league position and then the number of games included in season ticket sales. I think that 2 up, 2 down will possibly be a fair cop, but more needs to be done in grassroots and academy to ensure the long-term survival of the game. More needs to be done in advertising and clubs promoting themselves, which you've touched on. Robert Elstone's keen to get into the clubs and work with them on that, and hopefully that, like you say, can filter down as well beyond just Super League.
Yeah, and reserves was mentioned as well. Like that did come up, and Robert Elstone he says we need to produce more players. That is absolutely key to the future of the sport. We need more supporters, we need more players, and I think the group of clubs that you had at this meeting with St Helens, Wigan and Warrington, they're all very much pro-reserve teams, and I think if they got their way, the reserve grade would come back across the whole board, but I think that's one of many things to be discussed down the line.
Phil Nadine said, I always wondered why they didn't have proper promotion and relegation in Super League. It seemed unfair to the Championship sides who battle hard but for potentially no reward, and also in respect of the Super League sides there was no real fear of relegation just because you was bottom of the league. it'll be interesting. I think more of the Super League sides will have the fear of straight relegation and see if they start to panic near the end of the season or opt to get knocked out of the Challenge Cup, for example, in order to concentrate on the league. Yeah, we haven't really had that concentrating on the league thing because at the moment we've got people like Widnes and Salford who don't need to worry about if they were in the distraction of the cup if they were still in it, because they can kind of set themselves for that zero-sum start again, can't they, in the qualifiers?
Yeah, and that was that is one of the faults of the system. I was never massively on board with the Super 8s. I just wanted some kind of pathway back up to the top for clubs. I think it has provided some excitement, undoubtedly. The middle 8s are absolutely terrific when they get going. But I can see the other point of view at the top end of the table, and not just the uncertainty. I think, again, when Robert Elstone sat down with the group of written press, the first thing he said was he went to a game last year when Castleford were flying in the league. They brushed all before them. The first game of the Super 8s he went to was at home to St Helens, and there was 5,500 people there. He said he'd been telling his mates in Castleford, you need to get there early because this has got to sell out. And it didn't get anywhere near, despite there being two of the very top teams. And I think that painted a little picture in his head of how appealing those Super 8 games are, even to the top end clubs.
Yeah, and when they're not in, they are in the season tickets of most clubs, aren't they? But when you don't know what games are going to be on when, you can't plan your summer around. And I do this. You'll have to do it because it's your job, but I do this just because I love to go as many games as I can get to. Plan my whole year around when my team are at home, where they are away, what other games are on weekends where maybe my team aren't at home, that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, they spoke about fixture planning generally being a big issue for the sport. So I think it was Ian Lenigan who raised the fact that we're going to have a huge 3 games in a row against 3 of the biggest clubs. He said that just wouldn't happen in football. You wouldn't condense your kind of prime fixtures in that way. You would spread them out.
All at home.
No. And so that is something that they're definitely looking at, not just in terms of the Super 8s, but I think more sensible fixture planning generally, I think, going forward is something they see as key to getting people back in the grounds.
Well, I'm part of the fan volunteer engagement panel that Wigan have set up this year, and one of the things that I'm not sure if it's led by Lenigan feeling this way and putting it out to all the fans, or the fans what they've fed back in, because there's been lots of surveys asking questions around it, but that thing of uncertainty of the fixtures in the summer months and uncertainty of, you might get a Thursday night game thrown at you, or you might have a weekend where you booked your holiday and all of a sudden now you've got a game that you want to go to. Came up a lot in some of the fan engagement stuff that's happened so far, so I'm sure Lenigan was leading on that front. We've got Lee Whitnell, who was a guest host earlier in the season on Super League Pod. He said, I may be only relatively new fan, but I've already seen 2 of these seismic shifts. The current system is far from perfect, but one of these days we'll need to pick and then stick to a structure. All of this flip-flopping makes us look small time. Yeah, I replied to Lee to say that I'm 33 years old now, and basically next year will be the 13th different variation of how the top division's made up in terms of either the number of teams or the structure of how the teams, how many teams will go up or down, how many teams are in the playoffs, and how the league winners are decided. So that's one every 2.5 years of my life, Gareth.
That's incredible, isn't it, really? It's not a great statistic, is it? But it's quite eye-opening.
John Scotter says, until they come out and say how they are replacing the missing weeks, it's hard to call. Personally, I like the concept of the 8s, and the middle 8s this year was looking very interesting. So yeah, there is a lot to decide, isn't there? How the playoffs will work on this new proposed 12-team 1 up and 1 down, how promotion's going to work in the championship. It seems that the £1 million game might be effectively the championship grand final in the view of what the Super League clubs want to impose on the rest of the game, and things like that still need to be sorted out.
Yeah, I'm second guessing them, but if you're talking leagues of 12, I think they'd probably have to go to a top 6 playoff. If you've only got 1 relegated, they need to keep as many clubs interested, don't they? I think if you went top 4 or 5, you are looking at a potentially big number of clubs in the middle of each division there with not much to play for in the closing weeks. At least top 6 then would open it up to half of the competition and above. I think that would probably have to be the way that promotion was done. So, yeah. I know people favour the first past the post, and if you finish top, then you go up. But I think then you really would be closing the door to a lot of clubs who could get excited about being promoted. So they've got to work through all this, and quickly again, because all this kind of stuff needs sorting.
definitely. I always look back at the periods that have gone on, those 16 or so, whatever it was, 13 changes, and the one that actually seems to have been the most popular in terms of attendances and that sort of thing was just before licensing kicked off and just before the recession ruined rugby league communities, and that was this 6-team playoff in the Super